It was nearly 2 in the morning when the sharp, authoritative rapping on my front door jolted me out of a light sleep. I stayed still for a moment, my heart thudding against my ribs, wondering who could possibly be at my house at such an hour in this quiet, suburban neighborhood. I rolled out of bed and crept to the window, peeling back the curtain just enough to see a police cruiser idling at the curb with its blue and red lights dancing against the trees. Standing on my porch was a man in a full uniform, his badge gleaming under the porch light and a radio on his shoulder crackling with what sounded like official chatter. He looked professional, his posture straight and his expression serious, but something about the way he kept glancing at his own phone instead of the door made my stomach turn with a sudden, unexplainable dread. I didn't open the door. Instead, I reached for my smartphone on the nightstand to check my community security app to see if there had been a reported break-in or an emergency in the area. As I unlocked the screen, a text message notification popped up from an unknown number, and as I read it, the air felt like it was being sucked out of the room. The message was from the actual local police department's automated alert system, and it stated very clearly that there were no active patrols or dispatched units at my specific address tonight. I stared at the man on my porch through the glass, realizing that the uniform, the car, and the badge were all a carefully constructed lie designed to get me to turn the deadbolt and let a predator inside. I backed away from the window, my hands shaking as I tried to dial the emergency number to report the imposter, but as soon as I pressed the call button, the signal bar on my phone dropped to 0. I watched as the LT icon vanished and was replaced by a small, pulsing, searching notification that told me I was now in a localized dead zone. The man on the porch reached out and knocked again, harder this time, his voice muffled but firm as he shouted through the wood that I needed to open up for my own safety. He claimed there was a gas leak in the neighborhood and that he was there to evacuate me, a story that sounded perfectly reasonable if I hadn't already seen the warning on my phone. I realized he wasn't just a random criminal. He was using a high-powered cellular jammer in his fake police car to ensure that I couldn't call for help or verify his identity with the real authorities. I was trapped in a house that I had always considered a sanctuary, but now it felt like a cage where the bars were made of silence and isolation. I moved through the dark hallway toward the kitchen, my feet silent on the carpet, searching for a way to create a signal or get the attention of my neighbors who were all fast asleep in the surrounding houses. I looked at my laptop on the counter, but the Wi-Fi had also been knocked offline, leaving me with no digital bridge to the outside world. The knocking on the door stopped abruptly, and for a few seconds the silence was even more terrifying than the noise. I heard the heavy crunch of footsteps on the gravel walkway as the man moved away from the front door and began to circle the house toward the back patio. He knew the layout of the property, and he knew that the sliding glass door in the back was the weakest point of entry. I grabbed a heavy kitchen knife from the block, my knuckles white as I gripped the handle, and I crouched down behind the kitchen island just as I heard the faint, metallic scrape of a tool being inserted into the lock of the sliding door. He wasn't rushing. He was methodical and calm, which suggested he had done this many times before and knew that no help was coming for me. I realized then that I couldn't just hide and wait for him to find me, because once he breached that glass, the power dynamic would shift entirely in his favor. I needed to break the dead signal that he had created around my house. I remembered that my old tablet was still plugged in upstairs, and it was the only device I owned that had an old-fashioned Ethernet port that was hardwired directly into the wall. I sprinted up the stairs, my lungs burning with the effort of staying quiet while moving at top speed, and I dived into the guest bedroom where the tablet sat. I fumbled with the cable in the dark, my fingers feeling like lead, and finally heard the satisfying click as the internet connection was established through the physical wire, bypassing the airwaves that the intruder was jamming. I didn't try to make a voice call. I went straight to a live streaming app and hit the Go Live button, titling the stream with my address and the words "Imposter Police Breaching House." The tablet's camera flickered to life, and I pointed it toward the window where I could see the man at the back door. Within seconds, the viewer count jumped from 0 to 50, then to 200, as people on the internet began to see the live feed of the man in the fake uniform trying to pick my lock. I began to narrate exactly what was happening in a low, shaky whisper, describing the man's face and the fake car in the driveway. I knew the intruder couldn't see what I was doing, but the digital signal was now traveling through the wires and out into the world, far beyond the reach of his jammer. Suddenly, the man stopped what he was doing and looked up at the second-floor window, his eyes narrowing as he saw the glow of the tablet screen. He realized the silence had been broken. He didn't try to finish the lock. Instead, he turned and sprinted back toward the fake cruiser, realizing that his window of anonymity had slammed shut. I watched on the screen as he peeled away from the curb, his tires screeching against the asphalt as he vanished into the night. The Real police arrived 5 minutes later, tipped off by dozens of strangers who had seen the live stream and called the precinct from different parts of the country. They found the signal jammer discarded in my bushes, a black box that had been the only thing standing between me and safety. They told me that the man was part of a professional ring that targeted high-income neighborhoods using fake credentials to bypass security. I never rely on a wireless signal for my safety anymore, and I keep that old tablet plugged into the wall, a constant reminder that sometimes the old ways are the only ways to stay alive. The night shift at the Pacifica Data Hub is usually the most peaceful 12 hours of my week, a time when the only company I have is the low, hypnotic thrum of 10,000 servers processing the digital lives of the city outside. I was sitting in the glass-walled command center on the 3rd floor, surrounded by monitors that tracked everything from CPU temperatures to the humidity levels of the cooling fans, when the silent alarm for Rack 12 in the basement vault began to pulse a soft, rhythmic red. Rack 12 was a high-security node, a physical storage unit for a private legal firm that didn't trust the cloud, and seeing that door sensor trigger at 2:45 a.m. felt like a bucket of ice water being poured down my spine. I leaned into the microphone to call the floor security guard, but as I pressed the button, I realized the status light on my console was dark. I picked up the desk phone to call the main gate, but there was no dial tone, only a flat, hollow silence that told me the copper lines had been physically severed somewhere in the building's core. I looked back at the monitors, my hands beginning to tremble as I switched the feed to the basement corridor, and that was when I saw a figure dressed in dark tactical gear methodically unplugging the external fiber optic trunks from the wall. He wasn't a common thief looking for hardware. He was a professional saboteur who was systematically cutting the building's nervous system to ensure that no digital distress signal could reach the outside world. I watched on the grainy screen as he turned his head toward the camera, his face obscured by a dark mask, and he held up a small electronic device that looked like a remote trigger. A second later, my command center went completely dark as the primary power was cut, leaving me in a tomb of reinforced concrete and glass with only the dim, green glow of the emergency exit signs to guide my way. I realized with a jolt of pure panic that the data center's emergency protocols were now working against me, because in the event of a total power failure and communication loss, the magnetic locks on all external doors default to a closed position to protect the data. I was trapped on the 3rd floor, and the only person with the tools to override the system was currently in the basement, destroying the very servers I was paid to protect. I reached for my personal cell phone in my pocket, but I already knew what I would see. 0 bars and a no-service message, as the lead-lined walls and the intruder's signal jammer created a perfect Faraday cage around me. I had to get to the main lobby to trigger the manual fire release, but to do that, I had to descend 3 flights of stairs in total darkness while an intruder was moving upward to eliminate the only witness on the clock. I pushed open the heavy steel door to the stairwell, the sound of the hinges echoing like a gunshot in the absolute silence of the building, and I began to descend with my back pressed against the cold concrete wall. Every few steps, I would stop and hold my breath, listening for the sound of boots on the metal stairs or the hum of a radio, but the only thing I could hear was the frantic, loud thudding of my own heart. As I reached the 2nd floor landing, I heard a faint, rhythmic clicking sound coming from the hallway, the sound of the intruder using a master keycard to test every door as he made his way toward the stairs. He was clearing the building floor by floor, and I was running out of space to hide. I ducked into the 2nd floor server room, a vast, open space filled with rows of black metal cabinets that looked like giant monoliths in the shadows. The air was freezing, the massive cooling units still spinning on their backup batteries, creating a wall of white noise that I hoped would drown out the sound of my footsteps. I crawled under a raised floor tile where the heavy power cables were housed, pulling the metal plate back into place just as the stairwell door creaked open at the end of the long row. I could see through the small circular perforations in the floor tile as the beam of a high-powered flashlight swept across the room, the light reflecting off the glass panels of the server racks like a searchlight in a nightmare. The intruder walked slowly, his boots thudding on the metal floor tiles just inches from my head, and I had to bite my own hand to keep from gasping as the weight of his body caused the floor to groan above me. He stopped right above my hiding spot, and I watched as he pulled out a tablet and began to type, his thumb glowing a ghostly blue in the darkness. He was searching the internal employee directory, likely looking for my name and my photo so he would know exactly who he was looking for when he finally found me. I realized then that I couldn't stay hidden. I had to use the one thing in this room that could create a signal strong enough to penetrate the jammer. I waited until the light moved to the far end of the room, then I slid out from under the floor and sprinted toward the high-voltage UPS system at the back of the hall. This unit controlled the backup batteries for the entire floor, and it was equipped with a manual emergency power-off switch that was designed to dump all the electricity into the ground in case of a fire. I knew that if I pulled that switch, it would cause a massive electrical surge that would trip the city's power grid monitors at the local substation, alerting the utility company that something catastrophic had happened at our address. I reached the red handle and pulled it with every ounce of strength I had left, and the world was suddenly filled with a deafening, metallic roar as the massive capacitors discharged all at once. A brilliant flash of blue light illuminated the room, blinding the intruder and sending a shower of sparks into the air that smelled of ozone and burnt copper. The entire building groaned as the last of the backup power died, and for a few seconds, there was a heavy, ringing silence. I didn't wait to see if he was recovered. I used the moment of his confusion to bolt for the emergency exit, which had been forced open by the sheer force of the electrical surge's failsafe. I tumbled out of the side door and into the cool night air, falling onto the wet grass of the perimeter lawn just as 3 police cruisers and a utility truck pulled into the parking lot, their sirens a beautiful, chaotic symphony in the dark. The utility company had seen the massive surge and called the police, suspecting a major theft of copper or equipment. When the SWAT team searched the building, they found the basement servers destroyed and a collection of high-end hacking tools. But the man had escaped through a drainage tunnel he had unsealed weeks prior. They found my name circled on a printout in the server room, a chilling reminder that I had been seconds away from being a permanent part of the night's digital silence. I handed in my resignation the next morning, and I now work in an outdoor garden center, where the only signals I have to worry about are the changing of the seasons and the sound of the wind in the trees. I just arrived at my remote vacation rental and connected to the Wi-Fi, but my laptop immediately flagged a device on the network named Living Room Mirror. I stood frozen in the center of the open concept cabin, my suitcase still clutched in my hand, as I stared at the large, ornate mirror hanging above the fireplace. It looked perfectly normal, reflecting the rustic wooden beams and the flickering shadows of the trees outside. But the digital signature on my screen didn't lie. There was a hidden camera embedded behind the glass, and it was currently transmitting a high-definition data stream to a local IP address. I felt a wave of cold, physical nausea wash over me as I realized that from the moment I had walked through the front door, someone had been watching me in real time. I tried to tell myself that it was just a high-tech security feature, a way for the owner to protect their property. But then I noticed a second device appear on the network list, bedroom nightstand. My heart began to hammer against my ribs as I realized this wasn't about security. This was a systematic invasion of privacy designed to capture every private moment of my stay. I reached for my phone to call the rental agency and demand a refund, but as I tapped the screen, the Wi-Fi icon flickered and vanished. I looked at my cellular signal and saw that it was trapped on searching, a dead signal that made the isolated woods outside look like a vast, dark ocean. The house was smart integrated, and I heard the unmistakable, heavy clunk of the front door's electronic deadbolt engaging, followed by the motorized shutters on the windows sliding shut. The owner had remotely locked me inside the house, turning a cozy vacation rental into a high-tech cage with the click of a button. I was alone, miles from the nearest neighbor, and the very person who was supposed to be my host was now my captor. I stood in the sudden, artificial darkness of the living room, the only light coming from the glowing screen of my laptop, and I realized that the living room mirror wasn't just a camera. It was a window. I heard a soft, muffled sound coming from the wall behind the fireplace, a rhythmic scraping that sounded like someone moving through a narrow passage. I realized with a jolt of pure terror that the house had a hollow core, a hidden corridor built into the architecture that allowed the host to move between the rooms unseen. They weren't just watching me through a screen. They were physically present, separated from me by only a few inches of drywall and glass. I grabbed a heavy fire poker from the hearth, my knuckles white as I gripped the cold metal, and I retreated toward the kitchen where the only non-automated exit, a small laundry chute, was located. I knew I couldn't outrun a digital system, so I had to find a way to crash the house's main hub. I found the central control panel hidden inside the pantry, a glowing touchscreen that displayed the status of every lock, light, and camera in the building. My hands were shaking so violently that I could barely navigate the menu, but I saw a system maintenance tab that required an administrator password. I tried the most obvious combination, the house's street address, and to my absolute shock, the screen turned green and granted me access. I didn't waste time looking for the unlock button. I went straight to the factory reset option, which would wipe the custom configurations and return the house to its manual, unlinked state. As I hovered my finger over the confirm button, I heard the wall panel in the kitchen slide open with a hiss of pneumatic pressure. A man stepped out from the shadows of the hidden hallway, his face illuminated by the blue light of the pantry. He wasn't a monster. He was a middle-aged man in a professional sweater, holding a tablet that showed a live feed of the very room we were standing in. "You shouldn't have looked at the network, Sarah. It ruins the experience," he said, his voice a calm, chilling monotone that made my skin crawl. He began to walk toward me, his eyes fixed on the control panel, but I didn't hesitate. I slammed my palm against the confirm button and heard the entire house groan as the power cycled. The electronic locks on the doors clicked open as the system lost its programming, and the motorized shutters began to rise, letting in the pale light of the moon. I didn't wait to see his reaction. I swung the fire poker with everything I had, catching him across the arm and sending his tablet shattering against the floor. I sprinted for the front door, bursting out into the cold night air and running toward my car. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station 20 miles away, where the bright fluorescent lights and the presence of other people finally made me feel like I could breathe again. The police later discovered a labyrinth of hidden rooms behind the walls of that cabin, along with hard drives containing footage of dozens of previous guests. I never book a rental now without bringing a physical signal detector, and I always check behind every mirror the moment I arrive.